From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. It is beginning to look more and more as if President Reagan's visit to a German military cemetery is a no-win situation for him. From Capitol Hill to Europe, there are increasingly vocal demands for the president and German Chancellor Helmut Kohl to find a solution. We begin in Washington with Barry Seraphin.
The Senate sent President Reagan a message today, but it was also aimed at the man who will be his host in West Germany.
Chancellor Kohl, free President Reagan. Let our president go.
The message was contained in a non-binding sense of the Senate resolution. Its wording was gentle, simply calling on Mr. Reagan to reassess his planned itinerary, but the feelings were strong.
You can say it any way you want, but there's only one message, and that is, Mr. President, don't go to Bitburg.
The 78 co-sponsors of the resolution included a number of the president's GOP allies.
It's just our collective judgment that there was a mistake made that hopefully can still be addressed in some way.
Today's Senate action came on the heels of a letter from more than 250 members of the House urging Chancellor Kohl to withdraw the invitation to Bitburg. Even Mr. Reagan's longtime friend, Charles Wick, director of the U.S. Information Agency, this week called the scheduled Bitburg visit a nightmare and a tragedy in view of the controversy it has stirred up. And today there was pressure from another longtime supporter.
I don't think for one moment that the president or anyone on his staff intended to offend the Jewish people or our Second World War military persons, but I think it's a very bad mistake. And good men make mistakes, and I think the honorable thing to do is recant, not go. And I would entreat the president to do that.
Mr. Reagan's staunchest supporter overseas has joined the chorus. British Prime Minister Thatcher has declared that she has considerable sympathy with criticism of the planned visit to the cemetery. Reports continue to circulate that the White House is scrambling for ways to soften the criticism. But Mr. Reagan is said to be determined to go ahead with the Bitburg visit out of loyalty to West Germany's Chancellor Kohl. If Kohl does not budge from the plan, sources say, neither will the president. One former White House aide says it boils down to Mr. Reagan doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. Barry Seraphin, ABC News, Washington.
Well, everybody in the country is giving the president advice on how he should behave during his trip to Germany. ABC's George Will joins us tonight from Washington. George, what is your advice?
The advice, Peter, is don't go in the gate at Bitburg. Chancellor Kohl is, at this point, an immovable object. Washington has a great many people here who are as mad as hornets at him over what they consider his stubbornness. Congress is, at this point, an irresistible force that the president, I think, would like to say he must happily surrender to. It is hopeless to try and fine-tune this visit by adding some American war heroes or some members of the anti-Hitler resistance. The brute fact is, Peter, this visit is causing enormous pain to many Americans and a great deal of embarrassment to the United States. If the president cancels this trip, it may embarrass Chancellor Kohl, but it will not cause lasting damage between two great nations, and certainly the American people are not going to have a nervous breakdown if a president comes forward and says, boy, I messed this one up.
George, a lot of people are blaming Chancellor Kohl. Mr. Reagan is the president of this country. Why doesn't he just say, I'm not going?
Well, that's exactly the point, Peter. There are two interests in conflict here, Germany's and the United States. The brute fact is the president is president of the United States.
Exactly. George Will in Washington, thank you very much. It is ironic that the town of Bitburg should be at the center of this controversy. The relations between Americans and Germans there have always been particularly strong. There is a major American Air Force base there. ABC's Jim Hickey has been visiting Bitburg.
American F-15s scramble at the U.S. Air Base in Bitburg. The jets roar over the town every day. Over the war cemetery the president will visit. You hear no complaints about the noise or the Americans who make it.
The
Americans have become part of the community. The cooperation between German and American authorities is very good.
In the town, American and German flags fly side by side, along with those from the neighboring countries of France, Belgium, and Luxembourg. You find these stickers on local taxicabs.
Ein guter Präsident.
There have been anti-American demonstrations protesting nuclear weapons in the Bitburg area. Still, people here consider the town of Bitburg a perfect example of German-American reconciliation, a showcase in Chancellor Kohl's home state. He is eager to show off to President Reagan, the world, and his own country.
It's a question of his standing in German politics. It's a question of, for him not to lose his face.
Bitburg's population is about evenly divided. 12,000 Germans, nearly the same number of American servicemen and dependents. In the 30 years the airbase has been here, there have been 2,000 German-American marriages.
Everybody gets along real nicely. We don't have any problems.
The airbase is the town's biggest employer. 800 jobs for Germans such as these at the U.S. gas station. And the 10,000 Americans spend a lot of money.
The Americans spend in the month $1 million in this Bitburg city.
The Americans are uncomfortable about the controversy.
A lot of this happened before any of us were ever born, you know, and just to let it pass, let it die.
Germans are getting angry. The mayor today said if the unbearable abuse from U.S. critics continues, maybe the president's visit should be canceled. The hope here is that the uproar won't affect the amiable, though somewhat noisy, German-American coexistence. Jim Hickey, ABC News, Bitburg, West Germany.
We have two other notes from Germany. Last night, the West German parliament passed a law which makes it a crime to deny that the Nazi Holocaust took place. And in Berlin's Spandau prison, Rudolf Hess, the former deputy of Adolf Hitler, marked his 91st birthday today. He stays in prison because the Soviet Union refuses to let him be released. Later in this broadcast, a diplomat at the Soviet embassy in Washington is told to pack up and go home. Latest casualty of the Nicholson affair. Once again, a White House guest offers some blunt criticisms to the president. And a gravely ill Vietnamese refugee waits for the brother who may save his life.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, brought to you by Golden Grain, makers of Rice-A-Roni.
Rice-A-Roni savory rice pilaf reminds me of the old country. Wonderful times, the food, mountains of kyofte, sarma, dolma, sizzling shish kebab, and always savory rice pilaf. Today I serve Rice-A-Roni savory rice pilaf. The secret is in this packet. Chicken flavor, authentic old world herbs and seasonings. Rice-A-Roni savory pilaf. Your family will love it. Rice-A-Roni, the San Francisco treat.
Through the centuries, a wine has evolved with a unique taste, the taste of selected European vinifera grapes. A taste so incredibly delicious it wins awards year after year, every year. A taste that has won the hearts of more people than any other imported wine in history. Riunite on ice, so nice. If you haven't tried Riunite, you don't know what you're missing.
The United States and the Soviet Union are still at each other over the death of an American major shot by a Soviet soldier in East Germany last month. As we reported earlier in the week, a Soviet diplomat in Washington has now been told to pack up his bags and go home. Here's John McWethy at the State Department.
Ole Sokolov, the #2 man in the Soviet embassy, was called to the State Department this afternoon for the 4th time this week. In a 15-minute meeting with Assistant Secretary Richard Burt, Sokolov was told that a Russian assistant military attaché, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Gromov, was being kicked out of the United States. Gromov, who works in this building in Washington, was said to be very active in gathering intelligence for the Soviets. He has 7 days to get out. Burt said the U.S. action was a direct response to the unacceptable Soviet position on the killing of Major Arthur Nicholson last month in East Germany by a Soviet sentry. The U.S. continues to insist that the Soviets agree not to use lethal force against American military personnel in East Germany, that they apologize for killing Major Nicholson and compensate his family. In another protest aimed at the Soviets, the Reagan administration also today canceled U.S. participation in 2 ceremonies in Austria in the towns of Styrian and Erlof, commemorating U.S. and Soviet cooperation in World War II. Officials say the U.S. will continue to pressure the Soviets in small ways, but they feel to do more would not be in America's best interests, that arms control negotiations and high-level talks between U.S. and Soviet officials should go ahead as scheduled. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
The Soviet Union, meanwhile, had some very tough words for this country today. They came from the Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, at a meeting of Warsaw Pact nations in Poland. ABC's Walter Rogers is in Warsaw.
The leaders of the 7 Warsaw Pact countries gathered in the same 18th century Polish palace where the East Bloc's military alliance was ratified 30 years ago. Led by the new Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev, they extended the Warsaw Pact for another 20 years, formally binding Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria to the Soviet Union politically and militarily into the 21st century. Later, at a banquet, Gorbachev, in this his first trip outside the Soviet Union since taking the Kremlin reins, criticized the United States and its NATO allies for not agreeing to his recent call for a moratorium on deployment of medium-range missiles in Europe. And Gorbachev again warned the United States and Europe against developing a missile defense system in space.
If the preparation for Star Wars continues, we have no choice but to undertake countermeasures, including strengthening and perfecting our nuclear arsenals.
Despite today's show of friendship, the Warsaw Pact remains an uneasy alliance, which over the last 30 years has been racked by revolts in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. And Gorbachev is keenly aware that it is only the Soviet Army which holds this alliance together. Walter Rogers, ABC News, Warsaw.
When we come back, Central America. The president looks for new ways to put pressure on Nicaragua.
Enter the next decade. The Audi 5000S. It has become America's fastest-selling European sedan. And now, you can lease an Audi 5000S for $298 a month.
Morning is your time. The earth wakes up with you. Always feel that spark of life in everything that you do.
Grape nuts. For you, it's as natural as the morning. No sugar added, no preservatives. Just an honest, nutty crunch. Post Grape Nuts cereal. You know when you have it good.
Yes, you know when you have it good.
Hey guys, watch out for Timmy's leg.
Driving a bus isn't the easiest thing in the world. Fill it with 30 active kids, and you've got to work to stay calm. That's why Sanka is the only coffee that works for me. I enjoy it. And most important, Sanka doesn't have all that caffeine that could make me frazzled. That way, I know I'm doing the best job I can, getting my precious cargo home.
The coffee that lets you be your best. Sanka brand decaffeinated coffee.
Now that Congress has turned thumbs down on any financial aid for the Contras this year, the Reagan administration is looking for other ways to bring pressure on Nicaragua. It has been the kind of day we've seen at the White House before. A public emphasis on one subject, the private effort on another. Here's Steve Shepard.
Officially today, South Korea was the administration's #1 foreign policy concern, as President Chung Do-won arrived at the White House for meetings with President Reagan. But the real concern was Nicaragua.
Mr. President, what are you going to do about Contra aid?
Despite his public silence, White House officials announced today that the president has ordered a full review of all U.S. options to influence events in Nicaragua. That review is in response to this week's congressional denial of aid for the anti-Sandinista Contras. In Nicaragua, President Daniel Ortega, prior to leaving for Moscow, blasted today's announcement.
What they're analyzing are new aggressive options against Nicaragua. They are not taking into account American public opinion and the opinion of Congress. They are trying to impose their policy.
White House spokesman Larry Speake says the U.S. has no plans for military action, but economic measures are being considered. The U.S. is Nicaragua's largest trading partner, accounting for 18% of its exports and 20% of its imports. Cutting off U.S. trade could severely damage the already weak Nicaraguan economy. Other options include breaking diplomatic relations, stepping up military exercises in neighboring Honduras, or encouraging third countries to aid the anti-Sandinista rebels. There are any number of other things the administration could do to make life difficult for the Sandinistas. What the administration won't do is sit down with the Sandinistas and talk. Steve Shepard, ABC News, the White House.
For the second time in a week, President Reagan has been lectured by someone he had invited to the White House to honor. Last week, Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel criticized the president for his plans to go to Bitburg Cemetery. Today, it was an elderly Indian woman who had harsh words for Mr. Reagan. Here's ABC's Bill Greenwood.
It happened at a ceremony to honor senior citizens who volunteer spare time in service to their communities. A 72-year-old Navajo Indian, May Castillo, was singled out for her work with a Head Start program on her New Mexico reservation. Last February, when a school bus caught fire, Mrs. Castillo and her grandson saved 10 lives, an act of courage that had the president beaming.
May, thanks for showing that folks that our age still has plenty of spunk.
It seems she had even more spunk than the president thought, for her remarks of thanks turned into a lecture on the need for more federal aid to Native Americans and the elderly at a time Mr. Reagan plans more cuts.
Among the many needs we have are educational facilities, hospitals, senior citizen services, and policies for the aged.
Those problems come under what we have called the safety net, and which we intend to continue, and even with regard to our battles to lower the deficit, these things will not be done away with.
The president's own Bureau of Indian Affairs says spending on the Navajo reservation has been reduced, but a White House aide told Ms. Castile she was out of line for raising the issue.
Presidential aide Ann Kelly came up and said, you know, you shouldn't have made those statements. You know, you're supposed to say something very appreciative. That's what this ceremony's for.
When they tried to leave these handmade gifts for the president, the Navajos say the aide refused to accept them. The White House disputes that and says in no way was it trying to reprimand the Navajos. Maybe so, but the Indians are not convinced. Bill Greenwood, ABC News at the White House.
In tonight's Money Matters, one of the nation's leading news services, United Press International, may be about to file for bankruptcy. UPI has been having financial troubles for a long time, and it warned employees today not to cash their paychecks because they'll bounce. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrials lost about 9.5 points in light trading. For the week, stocks gained more than 8 points. When we come back, remembering the liberation of Italy 40 years ago.
AT&T is the better business machine.
Gail McGovern.
Bob Riley. Because the people of AT&T can tailor our long-distance services to help your business, large or small, work better in ways you never thought of. AT&T long-distance services, the better business machine.
That's us.
Talk with us. AT&T, the right choice.
You ever listen to a Tums? Did a Rolaids ever tickle your nose? Now, what about Alka-Seltzer? Listen. Now the nose. Those bubbles are telling you Alka-Seltzer is unleashing itself with lightning speed to attack your acid indigestion or heartburn with a headache. And that's something Tums or Rolaids can't do. So next time your body's telling you something, let it know you're listening. Send Alka-Seltzer to the rescue and feel it making you feel better. Fast.
Thanks a lot, Citibank. You had to make your Visa and MasterCard better than other banks. Just by using them, we earn bonuses called Citi Dollars. They could have saved us up to 40% on things like color TVs, VCRs. But my husband thought we should use ours for something a little more down to earth.
Are you ready, Wendy? It's your turn to beam us up. Now give her all she's got.
Visa and MasterCard from Citibank. It's the bank that makes them better.
It's painful to see a family friend go, one that has gone before its time. Pity you didn't do something while there still was time, like protect it with a Z-Bart Lifetime Protection Package. Z-Bart has lifetime limited warranties on paint protection, fabric protection, sound deadener, and rust protection. After all, what the car maker giveth, sun, salt, and spills, can surely taketh away. Be car smart. Get Z-Bart for the life of your car.
Tonight we continue our look at the major events marking the end of World War II. This week, Italians are celebrating the 40th anniversary of their liberation from fascist rule. Italy was the first of the Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, to surrender to the Western Allies. One of the major turning points in that campaign was the arrival of American soldiers on the shores at Anzio. Here's ABC's Don Cladstrup.
In the port of Anzio, the statue of a little girl stands vigil. It is the statue of Angelita, a victim of war, overlooking the beaches where American soldiers stormed ashore 40 years ago, where today another Angelita who survived remembers.
I remember, in the early morning, when we woke up, we saw the boats unloading the Allied soldiers.
The invasion of Anzio. But German defenders weren't the only ones surprised. American troops were too, for on the beach they found a child crying. Who she was, where she came from, no one knew. The soldiers called her Angelita, Little Angel. But before they could move her to safety, a German shell exploded nearby, killing her.
We saw the Americans as saviors, but what they did for that little girl, or what they tried to do, was truly a human gesture.
These days, it's sometimes hard to imagine what the suffering was like, here especially, where another statue, that of St. Benedict, watches over the abbey it has guarded for 1,400 years, the Abbey of Monte Cassino. 40 years ago, it was a different story. The Allied offensive had stalled. Casualties were heavy. The ancient monastery of Monte Cassino was believed to be a German stronghold, an enemy fortress that had to be destroyed. What happened next is something those who were inside will never forget.
We thought we were going to die. Everything was trembling. There were flames, smoke. We cried to each other, "We are dying, we are dying."
But Father Agostino did not die. Hundreds of others did, most of them refugees who had fled to the monastery for safety. The bombing proved a tragic mistake. There were no German soldiers inside the abbey, and never had been, according to Father Agostino. And yet, while Monte Cassino lay in ruin, the faith of those who survived remained intact.
Our faith increased because it was just God and Saint Benedict who were helping us. Only they could keep the bombs that were falling away from us, and they did.
In 1946, the resurrection of Monte Cassino began, its patron saint still standing, though scarred by shrapnel.
We rebuilt Monte Cassino in order to forget about war, to erase any idea of war.
But some images cannot be erased. The alliance between Hitler and Italy's dictator, Mussolini. The birth of fascism. And its death 7 years later, as the bodies of Mussolini, his mistress, and followers are hung in the public square after execution. A nation which once cheered fascism, now applauding its defeat. The liberation of Italy claimed more than 100,000 Allied lives, over 30,000 of them American. It was here, inside these caves about a year before Italy's liberation, that 335 persons were put to death by a Nazi firing squad, executed in retaliation for the deaths of 33 German soldiers who were killed in a bomb attack by the Italian resistance. Today, they are buried beneath a giant marker, just a few yards from where they were shot, the moment before their execution, symbolized by this stone monument. For Italians, such symbols are important, not only as reminders of the past, but also as guideposts for the future. Don Cladstrip, ABC News, Rome.
Home again now in Morganton, North Carolina today. There were funeral services for former Senator Sam Ervin Jr. He was chairman of the Senate Watergate Committee, which heard the testimony which led to the downfall of President Nixon. Some 350 friends, family, and former Capitol Hill colleagues heard the late senator eulogized as a great defender of the Constitution. When we come back, a Vietnamese teenager journeys halfway around the world in the hopes of saving his brother's life.
For years, the great American home of Buffalo Bill Cody has been protected by the weather beater from Sears, and the great American home of Betsy Ross by Sears Easy Living. Both paints are America's best sellers, and both are on sale for $9.99 now through Saturday. Save $6 on Easy Living Flat, $7 on Weather Beater Flat. Two great paint values for great American homes like yours.
There's more for your life at Sears.
If I work this hard getting my outside fit, it makes sense to keep my inside fit, too. So I help eat myself fit on the inside with Kellogg's Bran Flakes. They're loaded with fiber. That helps keep my inside running smooth. And Kellogg's Bran Flakes really taste good. No wonder they're America's favorite bran flake. So you take care of the outside, and Kellogg's Bran Flakes will help take care of the inside. Not a bad deal, huh?
The same size families are building the same size homes, but they're not making the same choices about the electricity they'll use.
Let's get the efficient one. Let's get the green one.
And making better electric choices in the beginning makes electricity an even better value in the end. Now both families are thrilled to be living in brand new homes. But for one of them, it's a cheaper thrill. Electricity. It's the power of choice.
I'm Ted Koppel in Bangkok. Tonight on Nightline, I'll be joined by Sidney Schamberg, the reporter whose stories served as the basis for The Killing Fields.
And Sunday on This Week with David Brinkley, Remembering Vietnam with General William Westmoreland. Watch Koppel tonight, Brinkley Sunday.
Finally this evening, a story we hope will have a happy ending. It involves one family's love for a relative half a world away, and unprecedented cooperation between the United States and Vietnam in a life or death mission of mercy. Here's ABC's Rebecca Chase.
Time is running out for 33-year-old Duc Chien Vo. The Vietnamese refugee has a severe case of aplastic anemia, a disease in which the bone marrow stops making essential white blood cells. He's bleeding profusely internally, and doctors here in Chicago say his only hope is a bone marrow transplant from a relative with a compatible blood type.
If we can keep him alive long enough to get the transplant, his chances of surviving are excellent.
And without the transplant,
he's going to die.
No question about it.
No question about it.
It is I love. Duc Vo has a wife and 4 children in the United States, but his 9 brothers and sisters, the only ones who can save him, live in a remote village in Vietnam. The United States has no formal relationship with Vietnam, but due to the unprecedented efforts of both doctors and diplomats here and abroad, arrangements were made for an American doctor to go to Vietnam in an attempt to save Mr. Vo's life.
Yeah, but tell him he has to go faster.
Dr. Judith Ladinsky arrived in Ho Chi Minh City 9 days ago. With the help of the Vietnamese government, she set up bone marrow blood tests for Vo's relatives.
If one of your blood is the same as your brother, you will have the opportunity to save his life.
The blood was rushed to Bangkok, where the delicate and expensive tests were performed for free. A few days later, Dr. Ladinsky returned to Vietnam with the results.
We think the person who is most compatible is Vo Hong Van. That you or you?
18-year-old Wang Van Vo got new jeans and tennis shoes for his trip. But the most important thing he brings with him is the gift of life he may hold for his brother. Using the first medical emergency visa ever issued by the Vietnamese government, Wang Van Vo left Vietnam yesterday and is expected in Chicago tonight. As Wang reached American soil, arriving in Seattle late today, his brother was transferred to Loyola University to prepare for the transplant. Duc Vo's condition remains critical. Time is his main enemy now.
I just hope he makes it long enough to have a successful transplant. This is his only chance.
Rebecca Chase, ABC News, Chicago.
Keep our fingers crossed. That's our report on World News tonight. Tomorrow, Kathleen Sullivan on World News Saturday. I'm Peter Jennings. For everyone at ABC News, have a good weekend and good night.
From ABC, this has been World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Friday, look who wants advice from Benson.
Do you think I could be an astronaut?
Last time they put a chimp in orbit was 1961.
Ben.
For the buyers coming tomorrow, I want you to wear something that shows off your personality.
Off the Rack. All starting at 9, 8 Central.
Tonight,